Hello, my name is George. I am one of Synthesia's many stock avatars. That is, I am a computer-generated image and voice. I am also the narrator of this video of the book, In Search of Competence and Uncommon Sense, written by Larry Markson. Larry wrote the book and this script in the first-person perspective, and as a result, it may sound like I am impersonating him. To be clear, I am absolutely not impersonating him. 100% of all the words I am speaking were written by him, including this disclaimer. That also includes my facial expressions. I am just narrating the book. While you read or listen to this, keep in mind that I ain't him, or he ain't me, or, well, you get the idea. After hearing some of my sea stories from my 9 years in the U.S. Navy, and his knowing of a few of my civilian experiences since then, my brother Bruce suggested that I write a book about leadership. I first rejected that idea as just so much nonsense. After all, who would want to read anything that I have to say? Not to mention the fact that I can't write worth a lick. Because I have an attitude and thought process that has allowed me to progress reasonably far without a college degree in an environment dominated by college degrees. It is also, unfortunately, the attitude, and not the thought process, which has prevented me from going even further. And it is also that very same personality flaw that has encouraged me to perform this most egotistical thing that a person can do. That is to put my thoughts in a book for others to read. Oh yeah! I get to join our philosophical forebears, Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. Wait! Wasn't Plato a cartoon pooch? Scratch Plato. Anyway, I only finally agreed to put my thoughts in a book as a result of the encouragement of family members so that I could lay the blame on them in the event it is a monumental flop. Also, my brother Bruce agreed to take the rough edges out of the book and remove about a gazillion commas and semicolons. I do so love commas, and semicolons are neat too. Remember also that if there is anything that ticks you off in this book, this was all his idea. Well, so much for the book. However, this video is all on me, I mean Larry. Now, about this video. It is based on my book of the same name, which was published in 2013. The only changes are a few updates in 2024. This video is in 2 parts. Part 1 is The Search for Competence, and has 5 chapters that include this introduction. Then Chapter 2 is about leadership. Chapter 3 is strategic thinking. Chapter 4 is analytical thinking. And Chapter 5 is ethical thinking. I have modified some off-color references and changed my tone so as not to be accused of nasty language or bullying by any censors. Please subscribe to Larry's channel so you can be notified when Part 2, The Search for Uncommon Sense, is completed. My thoughts in this book will be limited to what I have observed regarding leadership, which is basically competence, which, as you see in the illustration, is supported by strategic thinking, analytical thinking, and ethical thinking, all of which, when utilized properly, are interdependent. Not only is it a blueprint for those who want to be good leaders, but also it can be a guide for those who prefer to be followers that will enable them to choose good leaders to follow. From an email from my brother Bruce. With regard to the book, I am editing it from the perspective that you are a veteran with a PhD in life, and you have lessons from that life others can benefit from. Your stories sell the point that you have been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. I am trying to get away from any perspective that you may have any agenda, except to help those who do not have your experience. That means young and old, stupid and not stupid, leaders and followers, officers and enlisted. With that in mind, I can pretty much promise that by the time you finish this video, you will likely discover something that you hadn't known before. Count on it. Oh yeah, be forewarned, I love quotes and anecdotes. Anecdotes are great word pictures for illustrating my points, and quotes offer an excellent opportunity for me to piggyback on someone else's credibility and intellect, not to mention the fact that they sound mucho better than anything that could possibly originate with me. As a way to establish some small level of credibility, let me give you a short, although you probably will decide not short enough, biography of my experience. Chapter 1. who I am and where I came from. My first attempt at college was a disaster. I excelled in my major, which was party time and the deleterious effects of excessive amounts of alcohol on brain cells. But my grades were an unmitigated disaster. They were really, really bad. After 2 semesters of partying, and very little in the way of grades or knowledge to show for it, I quit. Actually, I was asked to leave. Well, not exactly asked to leave. I was not allowed to come back after the semester break. I was just shy of age 19 by a couple of months, and with the military draft looking for cannon fodder in Vietnam, I enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1968. Since I didn't have the connections to get into the National Guard or reserves like a future president of the United States did, I thought it was my only option. My first couple of years in the Navy were spent in sonar and ASROC fire control schools in San Diego, which I really enjoyed. After 9 years and a couple of trips to Vietnam, among other garden spots of the Pacific, the last 2 of which were shore duty in San Diego, I was discharged after having made it to the Chief Petty Officers Selection Board in just 6 months over the minimum amount of time. By the way, the reason for that 6-month delay was because of a run-in with one of my division officers on the destroyer USS Theodore E. Chandler, DD-717, that I had been assigned to. That run-in resulted in a poor review because of my disdain for officers and gentlemen. Our differences centered on him accusing me of lacking tact, and me accusing him of being a less than a marginal performer. Only I voiced it in much cruder and ruder sailor speak. I was, after all, only a semi-sentient and non-refined enlisted man, and I had our high tradition and reputation of the United States Navy to uphold. During my last 2 years on the destroyer, I was assigned a few duties that were normally held by commissioned officers, even though I was just a second-class sonar technician, and finally a first-class sonar technician. At the last duty station that I was assigned to, I supervised the maintenance and operations of about 10 electronics labs and simulators. There, both my division officer and department head were prepared to recommend me for a commission. Just prior to leaving the Navy, I had interviewed for and was offered 2 jobs. The first was with McDonnell Douglas as an instructor to foreign militaries at their locations on their Harpoon missile system, and the second was with a company that provided remotely piloted submersibles and operators to offshore drilling platforms. Since I had no desire to train people in pre-revolution Iran, South Korea, or any of the other less than idyllic spots in the world, I declined. Also, I had no desire to spend a significant portion of my life on offshore drilling rigs. Upon leaving the Navy, I went to work as an electronics technician for GTE Information Systems, now called Verizon, in Anaheim, California, which produced mini computers for stock brokerages and point-of-sale terminals for fast food restaurants. In just over 1 year, I was promoted twice, first to senior technician, and then to that of test department manager, whose department consisted of 50 technicians on 2 shifts. When the general manager asked one of our supervisors, whom I leapfrogged, what he thought of my being promoted, the supervisor said, "Fine, except you'll be losing your best technician." To which the GM responded, "No, we'll be gaining 50 more just like him." After 6 months of improving department output more than 300% with only a 15% increase in payroll, I took over the repair and refurb facility a few blocks away. Around that same time, my name was forwarded to the chairman of the board of GTE as being the person to contact in our business unit if anything came up over the upcoming holidays. This was both a tremendous source of pride and the beginning of my demise at GTE. Since I was a newbie to corporate politics and had, and still have, a strong disdain for politics and the slimeballs who practice it, both in business and in government, I ignored what was going on politically around me and focused on the work at hand. The long knives came out, and I started experiencing constant sharp pains in my back. As a result, I quit and went to work as a senior technician for an ex-boss, the man who I had replaced as test department manager, who had gone to another electronics company in Pomona, California. The company he was with produced automated test equipment for the electronics industry. Within 1 year of my leaving GTE, That business unit ceased operations. Their decline was not related to my departure, but more related to them not having a real business strategy or vision. The result was no future products and a declining market. During this same time, I made my second attempt at college. This trial lasted a few semesters and consisted of taking a full load of courses at night while I worked full-time, 10 to 11 hours during the day. I got good grades, 3.8 GPA, and made the dean's list, but was soon bored with the slow pace of college courses and disenchanted with the mediocre quality of some of the professors. I completed the coursework for a couple of programming classes in less than 2 weeks and got 4.0s, but quit one physics class because the professor was wrong about something and wouldn't admit it. I decided that I could learn more on my own and faster to boot. Did I mention that I have a large ego? I then started work at this automated test equipment company as a technician. After designing a couple of pieces of in-house test equipment and training a few technicians, I was transferred to our Chicago sales office in order to work as a field engineer covering the central U.S. and Canada. During my 2 years as a field engineer, I inherited other territories as other field engineers quit or were let go, and ended up with the entire U.S., Canada, and Puerto Rico as my territory. I also periodically went to the home plant in Pomona, California, to debug engineering prototypes and recommend engineering design changes, as well as developing and conducting training classes for all our customers' technicians, as well as our own techs. Shortly before leaving this company, I designed a new piece of automatic test equipment that the company decided to produce and sell. Well, I didn't actually design it. The concept was mine, and I showed engineering how to design it. After 2 years of field service, I decided I wanted to give sales a try. I was offered a sales engineer position at both that company and with Schlumberger. I chose Schlumberger. I was one of 4 people hired by Schlumberger as part of a fast-track training program for corporate management, and spent 2 years selling their automated test equipment, costing $35,000 to $150,000 per unit, to Fortune 500 companies. During this time, I helped design. Again, I showed engineering how to design another piece of test equipment similar to the one at my last company. This they then put into production. While at Schlumberger, I went through extensive training by Holden Corporation in power-based selling and strategic selling, both of which were extremely valuable, and was promoted to a sales manager position. I left after 2 years, mainly because I was at odds with upper management over their wish for me to utilize a scorched earth strategy with customers that had decided to buy from the competition. More on that later. That refusal later proved to be the right choice. All 4 of us fast-trackers were gone within 3 to 4 years of our hiring, and Schlumberger's automated test equipment business unit departed the U.S. within another 5 years because of corporate management not understanding, 1, the technology, and 2, the U.S. market. Their business strategy was entirely incompatible with those elements, and they had no desire to adjust. I then started my own independent sales rep company on a shoestring, with Schlumberger as my first client. I greatly underestimated the cash needed to last the first year of business. I thought I had found a shortcut. I was so wrong. Only after my decision to kill off the company due to slow cash flow did the money start coming in. As they say, the operation was a success. But the patient died. It was the wrong strategy due to my ego getting in the way and insufficient knowledge of what I was getting into. Over the next 7 years, I went on to a succession of automatic test equipment companies, chasing titles to feed my ego, such as Regional Sales Manager, National Sales Manager, and Vice President of Sales and Marketing. All of these companies were looking for a miracle worker, and unfortunately I couldn't walk on water. Their business strategies were all flawed for a variety of reasons. All but one of those companies was out of business within 1 year of my departure, and one of those companies nearly bankrupted me. A publishing company that produced trade shows and published trade journals then hired me as a salesman, and within 1 year, I was promoted to National Sales Manager of the high-tech group. Are you starting to notice the pattern here? It was during this time that I discovered yet another flaw in my personality. I had absolutely no interest in political correctness, and was and still am insensitive to others' phobias, wishes, and desires. One time I was called into human resources and was told that I was intimidating. I said, "Aha, and that's a bad thing," I was told. I countered that it is, however, a very efficient way of dealing with idiots. By the expression on the human resources manager's face, I was speaking in tongue. I have encountered that expression quite often. After about another 6 months, politics reared its ugly head again. And because of that, coupled with a disagreement and fallout over business strategies, I departed. I learned that while intimidation works very well on us Neanderthals in the military, it doesn't work very well in civilian life. Now, by this time, I was pretty much burned out on both sales and management, and wanted to do something that wouldn't contribute to my thriving ulcers and increasing dependence on Zantac. That was when I remembered making a sales presentation to a GM plant a number of years earlier. During a plant tour there, I was introduced to a production line worker who had a PhD in math. He was a local celebrity. When I asked him why in the world would a person with a PhD in mathematics be putting lug nuts on cars, he gave me an incredulous look like it should be obvious, and his response was, "Because no one can tell me what to think about." That statement stuck with me over the years and led to my final choice in careers: truck driving. No kidding. While I didn't care much for the long absences from home and the dealing with car drivers who thought driving was so easy, they didn't have to pay attention to what they were doing. The pay was adequate for my needs. While driving, I could think about anything, design anything, or delve into any social or economic puzzles I wished. For me, it was almost the perfect job. The only job that could have been more desirable to me would have been as a sheep herder on a mountain. Unfortunately, the problem was that sheep herding does not pay well. Also, I suspect there isn't even any need for sheep herders anymore. What a shame. Maybe the world's greatest thinkers for our future could come out of the sheep herding industry. In any case, as an added bonus, I had no more ulcers. Now that I think about it, maybe the oil rig job wouldn't have been too bad after all. When I was at my next to last trucking company employer, the owner had not renegotiated the expired contract we were operating under. He said he would just continue under the conditions of the old contract. Well, the shipper had other ideas. Without a contract in force, they started abusing the relationship. When I asked him why we don't negotiate a new contract with better terms, he told me he didn't know how. So I went with his wife, she was the brains in the company, to a meeting to negotiate a new contract. When we concluded the meeting, the owner of the manufacturing company we hauled for asked me, "What on earth did you do before you drove trucks?" So I gave him a much abbreviated version of this, and then we departed. A couple of days later, my trucking company boss called me, and the first thing that he said was, "When are you leaving?" I said, "I'm not planning to leave." "Why?" He said that our shipper was going to offer me a job. I told him not to worry, because the last thing I wanted to do was to go back into an office and work with a bunch of bosses and butt heads that didn't know what they were doing, or who wanted to do me harm. My boss later told me because of the new contract, this was the first time that he was actually making a profit. After 15 peaceful years driving trucks for 4 or 5 different companies and experiencing steadily worsening osteoarthritis, diabetes, and finally, congestive heart failure, I decided to stay home and annoy my wife. That is yet another thing I discovered that I do really, really well. There is a common thread here. I am impatient, absolutely intolerant of stupidity, refuse to participate in any kind of corporate intrigue, or promote anything that isn't true, safe, legal, ethical, or moral, at least my version of moral, and couldn't care less about being politically correct. Because of my rigidity, I have been unable to reach my full potential. I have been true to these core beliefs, and as a result, I have enjoyed reasonable, though not necessarily spectacular, success. I have, at the same time, had no trouble looking at myself in the mirror or sleeping at nights. Well, except for one hot summer night in Slidell, Louisiana, where I had to spend a humid, smelly night in a truck stop, parked between a truck loaded with fish on one side and a livestock hauler on the other. Pu. That stunk big time. Also, because of my Holden training in strategic selling, my fascination with the wisdom of Sun Tzu, as well as my deep interest in war and battle strategy and tactics, I have been able to come to understand the makeup and design of successful strategies and tactics, and how they come into play in everyday life. Aha, you say. You may have already noticed my many references to bad strategies by my former bosses. That is because probably the single biggest factor in leadership and competence is the successful use of strategies. More on that in a later chapter. And it is not the rants of a bitter old ex-salesman. Note: let me be clear about one thing. I never sought promotions because I wanted to be the boss. I sought promotions because every step up the chain of command or organization chart was one less level of idiots that could screw up my or anyone else's life. I guess you could say it was strictly self-defense or self-preservation promotions. One last thing. I occasionally do not follow my own advice, yet another flaw among many. I have recently begun to relate to the words of Frank Sinatra. I've been a puppet, a pauper, a pirate, a poet, a pawn, and a king. And I did it my way. Now, unless I have thoroughly bored you and caused you to stop watching or listening to this, let's get on with my observations and what I have learned about leadership. Click on In Search of Competence and Uncommon Sense, Chapter 2. And don't forget to subscribe to Larry's channel, so you will be notified when Part 2 of In Search of Uncommon Sense is available.